Let me tell you about the Thanksgiving that started with 38 people laughing around my table and ended with me standing alone in the pouring November rain while the turkey went cold and my entire world came apart at the seams. As I sit on my porch swing, the rain's drumming soft on the tin roof tonight, and the chains are creaking just enough to match the ache in my chest. I'm Evelyn Marie Jensen, 68 years old last March. Hair the color of winter wheat when the sun hits it just right. Eyes the soft blue of a robin's egg that's been loved too hard. I've lived on these same 200 acres outside Muskota, Wisconsin, since the day I walked down the aisle in 1979, wearing a lace dress my mama sewed from a butterick pattern and 2 yards of sale lace from the Richland Center fabric store. Let me take you back so deep you can smell the June heat and the fresh cut hay. Feel the dust of the county road under your bare feet the first time I ever laid eyes on Harold Arthur Jensen. Harold was born September 9, 1953, right in the front bedroom of this very white farmhouse, delivered by old Doc Havorson, who brought half the babies in Richland County into the world before he retired in '88. His daddy, Arthur Jensen, farmed 300 acres with horses until 1960 and then switched to tractors and never looked back. His mama, Nellie, could bake a pie that would make a grown man sit down and cry right there at the table and still have supper ready for 12 hired men every night during harvest. Harold grew up milking cows before the sun came up, driving the old Minneapolis Moline by age 9, fixing anything with an engine by 12. He was the kind of boy who would stop on a county road in a blinding snowstorm to help a stranger change a tire, then wave away a thank you and say only, "Pay it forward when you can." When he was 18, he enlisted because that's what Jensen boys did. Vietnam was still burning. He came home in 1973 with a Purple Heart he never once showed anyone, and a limp he joked was just my souvenir from Uncle Sam. He went to work as a mechanic at the co-op and spent the next 4 years quietly putting his life back together, going to church every Sunday, helping neighbors bale hay on weekends, waiting for the right girl. I was Evelyn Marie Olson, born March 12, 1957, in the front bedroom of the neighboring farm, delivered by my own grandmother because the roads were too muddy for the doctor. I was the oldest of 5, and from the time I could toddle, I was out in the barn with my daddy, perched on the feed barrel, learning how to read the sky for rain, how to swing a hammer straight enough to mend a fence before I was tall enough to see over it. I could drive the old Ford tractor before I could reach the pedals without 2 hay bales stacked under me. By 16, I was up at 4 every morning milking 40 cows, then racing to catch the school bus with milk still under my fingernails. Graduated valedictorian in 1975, turned down a full ride to Madison because corn doesn't plant itself. Harold saw me one Saturday in the spring of 1977 when I brought the truck in for an oil change, wearing overalls and pigtails and a streak of grease on my cheek. He told his buddy right then and there, "That's the girl I'm going to marry." It took him 18 solid months of wildflowers picked along the fence lines, fixing my daddy's baler for free, and sitting in our kitchen drinking coffee until midnight before I finally looked at him across the table one night and said, "Harold Jensen, if you're gonna keep showing up, you might as well stay for breakfast." We married June 23, 1979. Half the county showed up with potluck dishes because nobody could believe Harold Jensen had talked Evelyn Olson into settling down. We bought these 200 acres, next door from old Mr. Gunderson on a land contract with nothing down and a promise to pay it off in 20 years. Moved into the little house that came with it, painted it white ourselves with paint bought on credit, and started farming together like we'd been doing it for 50 years. Jacob Arthur Jensen was born June 11, 1980, screaming his head off and already looking like his daddy. Life was hard, money was tight, but we were happy. We had plans: new barn in 5 years, maybe a second baby, a porch swing big enough for three. Then Tuesday, June 15, 1982. Harold was disking the south field. Tractor hit a hidden stump, flipped, pinned him underneath. By the time the neighbor saw it and ran for help, Harold was gone. 29 years old. I buried him under the big bur oak by the creek. Simple stone, Harold Arthur Jensen, beloved husband and father 1953 to 1982. Then I rolled up my sleeves and kept this farm alive for 43 years. Milked cows before sunrise, planted corn until my hands bled, fixed fences in January with frozen fingers, canned vegetables until 2 in the morning, and still had Sunday dinner on the table for anyone who needed feeding. I paid that land off in 19 years instead of 20. Every single acre. Jacob grew up running wild through these fields. Brought Kimberly home from college in 2011. I opened my arms wide. Grandbabies came, Hannah in 2014, Harper in 2017. I thought everything was finally settled. I never saw it coming. Wednesday night, November 27, 2024, I was wrist deep in bread dough when Kimberly wandered in wearing perfect white sneakers that had never seen barn mud. "Mom, where's the old metal file box with the deeds and stuff?" I wiped flour off my hands and pointed toward the parlor. "Top drawer of the roll top desk, honey. Why?" She just smiled that tight little smile. "Jacob needs something for taxes." Thanksgiving Day 2024, Thursday, November 28. The house was bursting, turkey golden and perfect. Jacob carving with Harold's old bone-handled knife. Kimberly taps her glass. Ding, ding, ding. "We have an exciting announcement," she said, beaming like she'd won the lottery on Christmas morning. "Jacob and I have decided it's time for Mom to finally retire from all this back-breaking work. We've accepted an offer from Ridgeview Developments, $2.4 million for the entire 200 acres. Closing December 15th. We've already picked out the most darling assisted living villa in Madison." The knife stopped mid-air. A bead of juice dripped off the blade and landed, plop, on the white tablecloth like blood. I stood up so fast my chair crashed backward. The sound cracked through the house like a gunshot. I walked straight out the screen door in my apron and Sunday shoes and stood in the yard while the sky opened up and poured cold November rain. I stood there until every car was gone and the turkey sat cold on the platter and the rain had soaked me to the bone. Jacob never once came after me. The rain came down in sheets, cold, hard November rain that stung like tiny needles. I stood in the yard until my apron hung heavy and my gray hair was plastered flat to my head. I didn't feel the cold. I didn't feel anything except the place in my chest where my heart used to be. Inside, the cousins sat frozen, forks halfway to mouths. Children confused. Old Mrs. Gunderson started crying quietly into her napkin. Lewis, my hired man for 23 years, took his hat off and held it over his heart like someone had died, because someone had. The pastor tried to say grace anyway, but his voice cracked and he had to sit down. Kimberly kept talking, as if volume and speed could make this normal. "We've already picked out Mom's room. It faces the lake. They have a van that takes residents to the mall every Thursday. And the food is gourmet, no more cooking for 40 people. She's going to love it once she adjusts." Jacob still hadn't said a word. He was staring at the carving knife like he was thinking about using it on himself. Little Hannah, 9 years old, pigtails, gap where her front tooth used to be, tugged on Kimberly's sleeve. "But Mommy, where will the ponies live?" Kimberly laughed like it was the cutest thing she ever heard. "Honey, Grandma won't need ponies where she's going. They have a beautiful garden with fountains." That's when my sister Ruth, 65 years old and mean as a wet hen when you cross her, stood up so fast her chair tipped over. "You listen to me, you little city princess," Ruth said, voice shaking with 40 years of farm work and no nonsense. That woman has buried a husband, raised a son, and kept this land alive with blood and tears. You do not get to sell her heartbeat while she's standing right there carving the damn turkey." The room went dead silent again. Kimberly's smile flickered. For the first time, she looked around and realized 38 people were staring at her like she'd just kicked a puppy. Jacob finally spoke. His voice was small. "It's for the best, Aunt Ruth. Mom's getting older. She shouldn't have to work so hard." Ruth pointed one work-worn finger straight at him. "Your daddy was 29 when he died doing this alone. Your mama was 25. Don't you dare tell her what she can't do." Jacob's face went white. He opened his mouth, closed it again, then picked up Harper and walked out without another word. One by one, the guests started leaving. Nobody touched the pies. Nobody took a second helping. Plates were pushed away half full. People hugged each other in the driveway, whispering, "Did you hear what she said?" And poor Evelyn, and I always knew that girl was trouble. By 3 o'clock, the house was empty except for the sound of rain on the tin roof and the cold turkey sitting under foil like a corpse. I came back in when the last tail lights disappeared down the gravel road. Water dripped off me onto the linoleum. My apron was soaked through, my gray hair plastered flat. I looked like a drowned mourning dove. I didn't cry. Not then. I just started cleaning. I wrapped the turkey, stacked the pies in the fridge, washed every dish by hand, scrubbed the roasters until my fingers pruned, wiped down the tables with Murphy's oil soap the way my own mama taught me. When everything was spotless, I sat down at the kitchen table with Harold's empty coffee mug in front of me and stared at it until the sun came up Friday morning. That's when I called my best friend Clara. She was in her car before I finished the sentence. 2 hours later, she pulled into my driveway with a pan of cinnamon rolls and a yellow legal pad. We sat at that same kitchen table and started making a plan. First call was to the hospital. They faxed over the records from February 2024. Diagnosis: viral upper respiratory infection. Mental status: alert and oriented ×4. No delirium, no confusion. The doctor's note even said patient declined admission, eager to return home to farm duties. Second call was to the notary whose stamp was on the power of attorney. Name: Ashley K. Weber. Turns out she was Kimberly's college roommate from UW-Madison, now working at a title company in Fitchburg. She notarized the document on February 19th at 7:42 p.m., same night I was in the hospital 37 miles away hooked to an IV. Third call, Mr. Danielson. Mr. Danielson is 73 years old, still farms 180 acres with his sons, wears suspenders every day of his life, and can quote both the Wisconsin statutes and the Book of Proverbs with equal fluency. When Clara told him what happened, he didn't say hello. He said, "Be there in 40 minutes. Bring coffee and every scrap of paper you can find." He arrived at 11:15 sharp in his rusty Ford pickup, boots still muddy from morning chores. He sat down, opened the folder we'd started, and read in silence for 15 minutes. Then he closed it, took off his John Deere cap, and said the words that kept me breathing for the next 4 months. "Girls, what they did isn't just greedy. It's felony fraud, forgery, and financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. And in Richland County, Wisconsin, we still hang horse thieves, metaphorically speaking." He laid out the plan like a general before battle. 1, immediate temporary restraining order to stop the sale. 2, file to void the durable power of attorney on grounds of fraud and undue influence. 3, sue for intentional infliction of emotional distress and punitive damages. 4, ask the judge to freeze Jacob and Kimberly's bank accounts until trial. I listened with my hands wrapped around a coffee mug I never drank from. When he finished, I asked only one question, voice steady as bedrock. "Can we save the farm?" Mr. Danielson looked me straight in the eye. "Evelyn, I watched you bury Harold and still get the corn in that same week. If anybody can save this land, it's you. And I'll be right beside you swinging the hammer. That was the first flicker of light in 4 months of darkness. December came in like a slap. Ridgeview Developments didn't wait for closing. The Monday after Thanksgiving, orange survey ribbons appeared overnight. Yellow stakes hammered into frozen ground. Giant machines parked along the county road like steel vultures. A big white sign at the end of my lane. Future site of RIDGVIEW Estates Luxury Homes coming spring 2025. Every morning I woke to the sound of diesel engines idling, men in hard hats measuring the exact spot where Harold's tractor had flipped 43 years earlier. I stopped sleeping. I lost 23 pounds in 3 weeks. My hair started falling out in the shower. At night, I walked the fields with a flashlight and a shotgun I never loaded, just to be sure the machines hadn't crept closer while I blinked. Kimberly posted on Facebook the day after Thanksgiving. So excited for our family's next chapter. God closes a door and opens a mansion blessed. The picture was her and Jacob holding champagne glasses in front of a sold sign on my front gate. Comments poured in, heart emojis, congratulations, you deserve this. I stopped answering the phone. I stopped going to church because I couldn't bear the pitying looks. Jacob came by exactly once, 3 weeks after Thanksgiving. Pulled up in his new truck, stood on the porch in his city boots, and said, "Mom, you're being dramatic. This is for your own good. You're 68. You can't keep doing this alone." I looked at him for a long moment, then said, "Your daddy was 29 when he died doing this alone. I was 25. Don't you dare tell me what I can't do." Jacob left without coming inside. January 2025 brought ice storms and court dates. Mr. Danielson filed everything the day after New Year's. The judge, Hun, Margaret Olson, gray-haired and no-nonsense, granted the temporary restraining order the same afternoon. The sale was frozen. The machines stopped. The orange ribbons came down. But the war had only started. Kimberly lawyered up with a slick Madison firm. They filed motion after motion, claimed I was cognitively impaired, demanded a competency evaluation, accused me of elder self-neglect, said the power of attorney was perfectly legal because I appeared lucid when I signed it. They attached photos, me in the hospital bed last February, oxygen cannula in my nose, looking small and frail. They didn't mention I'd driven myself home 6 hours later to finish evening chores. The competency exam was scheduled for February 10th. I walked into that doctor's office in Madison wearing my Sunday coat and triple-strand pearls, hair curled, back straight as a fence post. The doctor asked me to count backward from 100 by sevens, spell world backward, remember 3 objects. I aced it. Then I looked the doctor dead in the eye and said, "Ma'am, I can still tell you the exact weight of every cow in my herd, the day she's due to calve, and how many bales of hay are left in the mow. You tell me who's impaired." Report came back, no evidence of cognitive impairment. Patient is sharp, independent, and fully capable. Kimberly's lawyers tried a new tactic, character assassination. They subpoenaed neighbors, old employees, even Jacob's high school football coach. Asked leading questions. Has Mrs. Jensen ever seemed confused? Does she live alone? Has she fallen recently? Half the county showed up to the hearings just to glare at Kimberly's attorneys. Old Mrs. Gunderson, 91, Walker and still sharp as a tack, took the stand in March and said, "That girl couldn't milk a cow if her life depended on it. Evelyn's been running circles around the rest of us since 1982. You leave her alone." The gallery erupted. The judge had to bang her gavel 3 times. March 17, 2025. The final hearing. Richland County Circuit Court. Standing room only. Reporters in the back. Phones banned, but half the county live streaming from the hallway anyway. I walked in wearing the same navy suit I wore to Harold's funeral, pearls triple-stranded, hair perfect. I looked like steel wrapped in Sunday grace. Kimberly's attorney, man in a $5,000 suit who'd never gotten dirt under his fingernails, stood up and started his closing. Your Honor, my clients acted out of love and concern. That's when it happened. The moment the internet still hasn't shut up about. I stood up, slow, deliberate, and interrupted him. May I speak, Your Honor? The judge nodded. You may, Mrs. Jensen. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Every microphone in the room caught it crystal clear. I buried my husband on this land when I was 25 years old. I raised my son alone on this land. I paid for every single acre with blood, sweat, and 43 years of sunrise to sunset work. That power of attorney was signed while I had a fever and no glasses by a notary who was my daughter-in-law's college roommate while I was 37 miles away in a hospital bed. My son stood in my kitchen on Thanksgiving Day and tried to sell his father's grave for $2.4 million so he could buy a bigger house and a faster truck. If that's love, Your Honor, then I don't want any part of it. I sat down. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the radiator hiss. The judge didn't even look at her notes. Power of attorney is hereby declared null and void ab initio. All documents signed under it are invalid. Title to the 200 acres remains solely in Evelyn Marie Jensen. Defendants are ordered to pay plaintiffs' attorney fees, court costs, and punitive damages in the amount of $500,000. Case closed. The gavel fell like a thunderclap. Kimberly started screaming. Jacob just put his head in his hands and cried. I walked out without looking back. Outside, the March sun was shining for the first time in months. I stood on the courthouse steps, took a deep breath that tasted like spring, and whispered to the sky, "We did it, Harold." That clip, my speech, went viral before I reached my truck. 10 million views in 24 hours. Farm not for sale trended for a week. Strangers sent cards, flowers, casserole dishes, checks to help with legal fees I never asked for. Spring 2025 came early to Richland County. The red-winged blackbirds came back the first week of April. The frost went out of the ground by the middle of the month. And I, Evelyn Marie Jensen, walked my fields every morning with a cane in one hand and Harold's old barn coat over my shoulders, making sure every inch of soil knew it was still loved. I paid off Lewis's mama's little blue house in town the day the punitive check cleared. I put $50,000 college funds in trust for Hannah and Harper, my name only, untouchable. I fixed the church roof before the snow was fully gone, and every leftover dollar went into the Jensen Land Trust so no developer could ever touch these 200 acres again. Harvest 2025 was the best in 40 years. Golden corn stood tall where orange survey stakes had been yanked out and thrown in the ditch. I ran the combine myself from dawn to dark, radio playing old Hank Williams, singing loud enough for Harold to hear from the oak tree. Jacob showed up the first week of June with nothing but a duffel bag and shame in his eyes. He slept in the bunkhouse, worked sunrise to sunset, spoke only when spoken to. By August, he was fixing fence beside me without either of us needing words. By October, he was calling me Mom again instead of staring at his boots. Kimberly never came back. She sent divorce papers in July. Jacob signed them without a fight. The girls spent the whole summer on the farm and begged to stay when school started. I enrolled them in Muscota schools the next day. November 2025 arrived with frost on the pumpkin and a sky so blue it hurt to look at. I sent out handwritten invitations on thick cream paper with a sprig of dried lavender tucked in each envelope. You stood with me when the world tried to take my heartbeat. Come watch the sun rise over it again. Thursday, November 27, 2025, 5:30 a.m. Bring a quilt and an empty stomach. Dress warm. Hearts will be full. At 5:27 a.m. on Thanksgiving morning 2025, 47 trucks lined the lane. People carried lanterns, thermoses, folding chairs, and quilts warmed on radiators all night. They walked single file up the hill behind the barn, the same hill Harold used to fly kites with Jacob, and spread their quilts in a wide half circle facing east. I stood in the center wearing Harold's red and black wool coat, hair silver in the lantern light, cane planted firm in the soil my great grandfather broke in 1892. Jacob stood beside me holding two steaming mugs of coffee. Hannah and Harper stood on my other side, clutching my hands like they were afraid I'd disappear if they let go. The sky bruised purple, then pink, then gold. Old Mrs. Gunderson, cousin Ruth, Lewis and his whole family, the pastor, Mr. Danielson, every neighbor who'd ever eaten at my table, 47 hearts beating as one. I didn't have a speech planned. I just opened my mouth and the words came straight from my soul. 1 year ago today, I thought my story was over. I thought the people I loved most had sold me while I was still breathing. I thought I'd die of a broken heart before Christmas. But you showed up. You called, you prayed, you stood in the rain with signs, you filled my freezer when I couldn't cook. You reminded me that family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's the people who choose to stay when the others walk away. The sun broke free then, spilling liquid gold across every face, every quilt, every heart that had refused to let my heartbreak be the end. I raised both arms, tears shining but smiling wider than anyone had ever seen. This land is safe forever. The deed is in a trust. When I'm gone, it stays farmland, no houses, no cul-de-sacs, no fountains. It will feed families and hold sunrises for as long as the creek runs and the oak stands. And every single one of you, your children, your grandchildren, will always have a place at this table. A cheer went up that scattered the crows for miles. Somebody started Amazing Grace. By the second verse, even the teenagers were singing. By the third, the sun was fully up, and the frost was melting into diamonds on every blade of grass. We ate breakfast on the hill until our fingers were sticky with cinnamon rolls, and our hearts were too full for words. Then we walked down to Harold's Oak, laid flowers, told stories, laughed until we cried and cried until we laughed again. At noon, we filled the house for real Thanksgiving dinner, tables stretching across dining room and parlor, same blue platter, same bone-handled knife. When Jacob stood to carve, he looked at me first. "May I?" I handed him the knife handle first. "You may, son." And when the prayer was said, longer than ever, because now there were even more people to thank, I looked around at every face and knew, down to my bones, that some things can't be stolen. Not if enough hearts decide to guard them. That night, after the last dish was washed and the last child tucked into a guest bed, I stood on the porch with Jacob, watching the moon rise over the fields I'd saved. "I was scared I'd never see another Thanksgiving here," I said quietly. Jacob put his arm around my shoulders. "You will, Mom, every single one, I promise." I leaned my head against my boy, the man he'd become again, and whispered, "I know, baby, I know." And somewhere in the distance, the creek kept singing its same old song. The oak stood guard over two hearts finally at peace. And the land, 200 acres of Wisconsin dirt bought with blood, sweat, and unbreakable love, breathed easy under the stars. You know, watching Evelyn stand there in that courtroom, voice steady as bedrock, it reminded me of something I hope you tuck deep in your heart and never let go of. Family isn't always the people who share your blood. Family is the people who refuse to let you drown. And if anybody at all, ever tries to steal your home, your peace, or your dignity just because they think you're too old, too tired, or too kind to fight back, you look them dead in the eye the way Evelyn did and you speak your truth, even if your voice shakes. Because greed can make folks do ugly, ugly things, but it has never once beaten a woman who remembers exactly who she is. So tell me down in the comments, my sweet roses, has someone ever tried to take advantage of you when you were at your lowest? Has anyone ever counted you out too soon? Leave it right here. I read every single one. You're never alone on this porch. The world may bend you, darlin', but it doesn't get to break you, not unless you let it. I love you endlessly. I'll leave the porch light on. Auntie Rose.